Her thumb was over the play button. 11 people sat around that table, and not one of them knew what was coming. She had waited 11 years for this exact chair at this exact table in her own house. Let's go back. 11 years, and one Thanksgiving before this one. Sharice Monroe sat through 11 years of her mother-in-law humiliating her in front of her own children. She never raised her voice back, not once. She did not correct Diane in front of the kids. She did not ask her husband to pick a side. She did not walk out of a single dinner. But she started doing one thing every single time it happened, and that one thing was about to sit in front of 11 people at once. Diane Monroe was known for two things: her cornbread dressing, praised every year for 31 years running, and a way of making Sharice feel like a guest in her own marriage. At church they called her Mrs. Monroe like it was a title. She had chaired the usher board for 19 years. She had never missed a Sunday. Sharice wore the same pin to every dinner, small oval, the enamel chipped along one edge. Her grandmother's. Diane had called it a dollar store trinket, loud enough for the table to hear. $3.40 was what Sharice's grandmother paid for it at a flea market in 1984. Sharice knew the number by heart. She had never told Diane. Nobody in that family ever asked where the pin came from. They asked about the dinner rolls. They asked about Diane's cornbread. Nobody asked about the small chipped thing pinned over Sharice's heart at every single gathering for 11 years. Javon never asked either. He loved his wife. He loved his mother. For 11 years, loving both looked the same from the outside: quiet, agreeable, present. It was not the same on the inside, and only one person at that table carried the difference. There was a boy at that table too, Deshaun Jr. 8 years old that year. He had heard his grandmother's voice go sharp more times than any 8-year-old should have to count. He had a way of going still when it happened, not crying, just still, the way his mother went still. His little sister, Aaliyah, was too young that first year to understand any of it. She would not stay too young for long. Somewhere on Sharice's phone was a folder she had never shown anyone but her sister, Keisha. It did not have a dramatic name. It was called Thanksgiving. By the time this story catches up to itself, that folder would hold 11 recordings, not one of them longer than 90 seconds. That would change, and not the way anyone at that table expected. This is the story of how she got there. 11 years, one folder, and the last recording she ever needed to make. She was still wearing the pin the night she finally hit play. Sharice and Javon Monroe had been married 11 years by the Thanksgiving this story keeps circling back to. They met at a cousin's cookout in Petersburg, Virginia, the summer Sharice turned 26. Javon proposed 14 months later, in the parking lot of the DMV of all places, because he could not wait one more day, and the DMV was where they happened to be. Sharice taught 4th grade at a public school in Richmond for 6 years before she moved into special education, specifically behavior intervention, the classroom for kids whose bodies could not always hold what their feelings were doing. She kept what the district called an ABC log for every student on her caseload: antecedents, behavior, consequence. What happened right before, what the child did, what happened right after. There was a boy on her caseload that fall, 9 years old, who threw his chair every time a substitute mispronounced his name. Sharice did not punish him for it. She wrote down what happened 40 seconds before the chair left his hands every single time, until the pattern showed itself plain as arithmetic. The substitute stopped mispronouncing his name. The chair stayed on the floor. Nobody in that classroom called it a strategy. They just called it Mrs. Monroe being good at her job. She filled out logs like that without thinking about it, the way another person might check a mirror before leaving the house. It was not a skill she talked about at dinner parties. It was just a habit that paid her bills. She did not yet know she was about to start using it somewhere else. Diane Monroe had raised Javon alone in Richmond after his father left when Javon was 7. She had worked 22 years at the same insurance office downtown, retired with a pension, and put every ounce of what was left of her into the church and into her son. Javon adored her. He said so plainly, the way some men say the sky is blue, and for 11 years Sharice had watched that adoration. Her mother-on word carried more weight in that family than her own, at every table, every holiday, every single time. It started small. At the engagement dinner, Diane had looked at Sharice's ring and said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, that she hoped Javon had kept the receipt. Everyone laughed. Sharice laughed too, because that was what youths did. It did not stay small. By the time Deshaun Jr. was born, Diane had a running list of things Sharice did wrong. The way she seasoned greens, the way she folded towels, the way she let the baby cry for 11 whole seconds before picking him up, which Diane had once announced to her room of relatives was, in her professional opinion as a grandmother, a form of neglect. Sharice did not argue. She had decided early. She could not have said exactly which dinner, only that it was early, that arguing with Diane in front of family only fed something in her mother-in-law that needed feeding. So she went still instead. She answered short. She changed the subject. She let it pass over her like weather. Javon's answer every time was some version of the same 6 words. That's just how Mama is, he said it gently. He said it like an apology and a defense at once. He never told his mother to stop. He had never once in 11 years told his mother to stop. It was not that Javon was a bad husband. He drove 40 extra minutes each way so Alia's speech therapist could be the one they trusted. He never missed a single one of Deshaun Jr.'s basketball games, home or away, in 3 seasons. He noticed when Sharice was tired before she said so. He was, in almost every room of their life together, careful. His mother's house was the one room where that carefulness ran out, and Sharice had spent 11 years wondering whether he even noticed it running out, or whether it simply never occurred to him that it had. Javon's younger sister, Monique, sat through most of those dinners without saying a word either, though she had grown up under a version of the same weather long before Sharice ever arrived at that table. Monique had her own house 40 minutes away now, and her own reasons for showing up late and leaving early. Nobody had ever asked her why. She had never offered. What she was doing next was for the 2 of them to carry, and no one else needed to know yet what shape it was taking. Sharice's own sister, Keisha, was the only person who heard the whole truth of it, usually over the phone on the drive home from Diane's house, the kids asleep in the back seat. Keisha said the same thing every year. You don't have to keep going there. And every year Sharice said the same thing back. He's her only son. She's not going anywhere. Neither am I. By the time Deshaun Jr. was 8 and Alia was 5, the pattern had a shape to it Sharice could have drawn with her eyes closed. Diane needled. Sharice absorbed. Javon smoothed it over afterward with a phone call to his mother that never once mentioned what had actually happened. The children watched all of it, every year, from booster seats and folding chairs at the edge of the table. Diane's knees had started giving her trouble 2 winters back, and hosting had gotten harder for her, though she would not say so outright. She still insisted on doing it herself every year. 29 years running, the extended family liked to say, like it was a record nobody had the nerve to break. This was the year Sharice broke it. It was Javon's idea, or at least he thought it was. He mentioned, almost in passing, that maybe this year they should host, save his mother the trouble with her knees. Sharice said yes before he finished the sentence. She said it fast enough that Javon looked at her twice. She told him it was about Diane's knees. That was true. It was not the only reason. Diane agreed to it with less resistance than anyone expected, which Sharice noted and set aside without yet what she would do with the noticing. Diane said she supposed her house had gotten too small for how the family had grown anyway. 19 people last year, she said, counting the Fentons twice by mistake. She said it like a gift she was giving. Nobody corrected the count. Nobody argued with the gift either. So the plan was set 2 months out. Thanksgiving at Sharice and Javon's house on Fenwick Lane. For the first time in 11 years' marriage, Sharice would cook. Sharice would set the table. Sharice would choose where everyone sat, and whose voice came through the speaker in the corner of the room. She had bought that speaker in October for music. That was the truth as far as anyone needed to know. It would not stay the only truth for long. The promotion came in March. Behavior intervention led for 3 elementary schools, not just one, with a raise that put an extra $461 a month in the Monroe household. Sharice's principal called it overdue. Sharice called Keisha first before she called anyone else, including Javon. Javon wanted to celebrate. He picked the restaurant himself, a steakhouse off Broad Street, and he invited his mother without asking Sharice first because in 11 years it had never once occurred to him that he needed to. Diane arrived in a blue dress Sharice had never seen, ordered the salmon, and congratulated Sharice on the promotion in a single sentence before moving on to something else. That's nice, 3 schools now. Must be hard keeping track of all those children when you can barely manage the 2 you've got at home. Nobody at the table laughed. Nobody corrected her either. Javon reached for the bread basket. Diane spent the next 20 minutes asking Deshaun Jr. about his times tables. He did not know them the way she wanted him to know them. He was 8. He got 2 of them wrong, out loud, at the table, and went very quiet, the way he always went quiet, the way Sharice had watched him go quiet 100 times before at that same kind of table. Diane set her fork down. "Someone in this family needs to teach this boy some focus," she said. "I don't know what they're doing in that classroom of yours, Sharice, but it clearly isn't reaching home." The table went still. Not the room, just the table. 4 adults and 2 children, all of them suddenly interested in their plates. Sharice's job, professionally, was behavior. She had a folder at work 3 inches thick on exactly this. What happens to a child's nervous system when an adult raises the stakes on a simple mistake in front of an audience? She knew better than anyone at that table precisely what Diane had just done to her son. She said none of that. What she said was 6 words. "He's 8. He's fine, Diane." Diane did not let it go. "I raised a son in this family who could recite times tables by 6 years old. I'm only saying what I see." "You said it in front of him," Sharice said, 6 more words. She did not raise her voice to say them. "I said it because somebody has to," Diane said. "That's what family does. We tell each other the truth. Nobody ever wants to hear it, but somebody has to say it." Aliyah, 5 years old and mostly ignored so far, asked if she could have more bread. Nobody answered her right away. She asked again, louder, and Javon finally passed her the basket without looking at her. Under the table, Sharice's hand had gone to her cardigan pocket, the left one, the same side where the pin sat pinned above it. Her phone was already there. Her thumb found the record button without her looking down, the way her thumb found a lot of things without her looking anymore. She did not decide to do it. Exactly. It was closer to the way her hand moved when a chair went flying in her classroom, before the thinking part of her caught up with what her body was already doing. 22 seconds. That was the whole recording. Diane's voice, clear as anything, saying the 6-year-old line twice, close enough together that a listening Layler would hear exactly how much she meant it the second time. Later that night in the car, Deshaun Jr. asked from the back seat whether he was bad at school. Aliyah, half asleep beside him, asked what focus meant. Sharice answered the older question first before Javon could get a word out. "You are not bad at anything." 4 words, then a 5th. Grandma was wrong. Javon did not say anything for the rest of the drive. When they got home and the kids were finally in bed, he found Sharice in the kitchen, drying the same glass for longer than a glass mod needed drying, and said the 6 words she had heard from him more times than she could count by then. "She's old school, don't take it personal." "He's 8, Javon." "I know, I'll talk to her." He did not talk to her. Sharice knew he would not. the same way she knew what a chair looked like a full 10 seconds before it left a child's hands in her classroom. She had gotten very good at reading the antecedent. She was still working on what to do about the consequence. That night, after Javon had gone to sleep, Sharice sat at the kitchen table with her phone and made a folder. She almost named it something else, something angrier, something that would have needed explaining if anyone ever saw it over her shoulder. She named it Thanksgiving instead. Because nobody looks twice at a folder called Thanksgiving in March, and because some part of her already knew where this was heading, even if she could not have said so out loud yet. She saved the recording. 22 seconds, the first of what would become 11. Tell me, Song, has there ever been a dinner like that one at your own table, where you sat there and said almost nothing, and everyone at that table assumed your silence meant there was nothing to say? If there has, I'd like to hear about it below. No judgment either way. Some of the strongest people I know are the quietest ones in the room. Diane never mentioned the dinner again. Neither did Javon. Sharice mentioned it exactly once to Keisha on the phone, using 4 words she had never said about before. I'm keeping count now. Keisha did not ask what that meant. She had known Sharice for 31 years. She knew what it meant when her sister started keeping count of anything. The new role came with 3 additional evening meetings a month, spread across thrice different schools, none of them optional. Javon picked up more nights alone with the kids that spring than he had in the previous 4 years combined, and he never once complained about it out loud. Diane noticed anyway. She always noticed. By June, her comments at Sunday dinners had shifted shape, not about times tables anymore, but about how a woman with 2 young children ought to think twice before chasing 3 schools' worth of paperwork. She never said it to Sharice directly again after the steakhouse. She started saying it to Javon instead, in the kitchen, into a voice pitched just low enough to sound private and just loud enough to carry. Javon repeated none of it to Sharice. He did not have to. She could read a room the way she read a classroom, and by July she understood exactly what Diane was building toward, even if she could not yet see the shape of where it would land. Spring turned into summer. The folder stayed at 1 recording for a while. It would not stay there long. Recordings 2 through 10 came the way most things do once a habit sets in, quietly, in different rooms, on different Sundays, spread across a summer and most of a fall. A comment about Sharice's cooking at a cookout in June. A comment about her clothes at a cousin's graduation in August. A comment about her own mother, dead 9 years now, made in October in a kitchen doorway while Sharice was reaching for a serving spoon. None of them lasted longer than a minute. All of them went into the folder called Thanksgiving. A comment about the $7 Sharice spent on a birthday card in September, called cheap to her face at a cousin's barbecue. Small things. Diane never repeated herself exactly, which was almost impressive in its way, 11 years, and she had never once run out of new angles. Sharice did not go looking for reasons to record. She had simply stopped believing, somewhere around recording 4, that any of it was going to stop on its own. The 11th came at a christening. Denise Fenton's youngest, a girl, was being baptized at Shiloh Baptist on the 2nd Sunday of November, and the whole extended family had turned out for it. Cousins Sharice barely saw outside of holidays, an aunt from Petersburg, Diane in the front pew, in a white hat she had owned longer than Sharice had known Javon. Afterward, everyone gathered in the fellowship hall for cake and punch, 40 or 50 people moving between folding tables. Deshaun Jr. had brought a book to keep himself occupied during the long parts of the service, the way he always did, and he was still reading it at the fellowship hall table when Diane found him there. "Put that down," she said. "You're at a family function. Nobody wants to see a child with his face in a book while grown folks are trying to talk to him." Deshaun Jr. put the book down. He did not say anything. "And look at you," Diane went on, to the table now, not just to him. 9 years old, and can't hold eye contact with his own grandmother for 2 minutes. I don't know what's happening in that house, but a child ought to know how to speak to his elders by now. He was 8, not 9. Nobody corrected her. Deshaun Jr.'s chin dropped toward his chest, and his shoulders came up around his ears the way they did right before he cried. A shape Sharice had spent 8 years learning to read faster than almost anyone alive. She's not raising him right, and everybody at this table knows it. They're just too polite to say so, Diane said, not lowering her voice at all now, looking around the fellowship hall table for agreement she did not get and did not seem to need. I raised a son who looked grown adults in the eye by the time he could walk. Deshaun Jr. started crying. Not loudly, just tears, running straight down, his hands still folded in his lap the way Sharice had taught him to sit in church. Sharice's hand found her cardigan pocket before her mind had finished catching up to what her ears had just heard. She did not say anything to Diane, not one word. She stood up, walked around the table, and picked her son up out of his folding chair the way she had not picked him up in almost 2 years because he was getting too big for it, and both of them usually pretended not to notice. He was not too big for it that day. She carried him out through the side door of the fellowship hall, past 3 tables of people who all found something else to look at. Behind her, she heard Diane say one more thing, to the table, in the voice of someone closing an argument she believed she had won. "I'm only saying what's true. Somebody has to." Outside, in the church parking lot, Sharice set Deshaun Jr. down on the tailgate of a stranger's truck and crouched in front of him until they were eye level. She did not tell him his grandmother was wrong, not right then. She did not tell him anything at all. She just held both of his hands until his shoulders came back down from around his ears, which took almost 4 minutes, and she counted every one of them silently, the same way she counted seconds in her own classroom. The recording ran 1 minute and 11 seconds. It was the longest one in the folder by nearly a minute. That night, after both kids were finally asleep, Sharice sat on the edge of the bed and told Javon in as few words as she could manage that something needed to change. Not a fight, not an accusation, just a fact laid down flat. "Your mother made Deshaun cry today in front of 50 people. Javon rubbed his face with both hands. "She didn't mean it like that. She meant it exactly like that, Javon. Can we not do this tonight? I'm tired. It's been a long day. He's 8. And he cried in front of 50 people because your mother called him slow, Javon. She didn't say slow. She said everything but the word. That was the end of the conversation." Sharice did not push it further. She had learned over 11 years exactly how far pushing got her, which was nowhere, and she had stopped spending herself on nowhere sometime around recording 6. 2 days later, Diane called Javon, not Sharice, and asked whether the kids could start coming to her house on Wednesday evenings, just her and the grandkids, no parents, so she could get some real time in before they grow up and forget her. Javon told her he would think about it. He did not mention it to Sharice for 4 more days, and when he finally did, it was framed as his mother's idea, something reasonable, something Sharice was for free to say no to if she really wanted to make it a whole thing. Sharice said no. Javon looked surprised that she had. Monique caught her eye across the kitchen the following Sunday, the 2 of them alone for a moment while the men watched football in the next room. Monique did not say anything about the christening, or about Wednesday evenings, or about any of it. She just held Sharice's gaze a beat longer than usual, then looked away first the way she always did. Sharice went home that night and opened the folder. 11 recordings. She counted them again. Though she already knew the number by heart, the same way she knew the district's behavior intervention protocols, the same way she knew her son's shoulders would come up around his ears 3 full seconds before the first tear ever fell. 11 recordings, and not one of them had changed a single thing yet. She was starting to understand that changing anything was never going to come from showing them to Diane. She did not know yet that recording 12 was coming. She did not know it would be the last one she ever needed to make. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Diane hosted what she called a small family dinner. Just Javon, Sharice, the kids, nobody extended, a kind of warm-up for the big day still ahead. Sharice almost canceled. She had a turkey to order and a house to get ready and 11 years of instinct telling her that small and private with Diane usually meant worse, not better. She went anyway. She always went anyway. It started fine. Diane had made the cornbread dressing early, a test run, she said, and it was good, and Sharice told her so. And for 11 minutes the whole evening felt like it might just be a normal Sunday. Diane had set the table with the good china, the set she only brought out for occasions she considered occasions, and she had put a candle in the center that she lit and then blew out twice, unsatisfied with the angle of the smoke both times. Deshawn Jr. ate his greens without being asked. Alia colored quietly at the corner of the table. For a while it really did look like the kind of evening families are supposed to have. Then Javon mentioned the trip. Slipped out sideways the way most things slipped out of Javon around his mother. Not a decision, just a detail, offered without thinking. They had booked 4 days at the beach in South Carolina over winter break, right after Christmas, just the 4 of them. Sharice's promotion bonus had covered most of it. It was the first real vacation the family had taken in 3 years. Diane set her fork down the way she always set her fork down before the worst of it. "Just the 4 of you," she said. It was not a question. "It's a short trip, Mama," Javon said. "We'll be back before New Year's. I didn't ask how long it was." "I asked who's going." Diane looked at Sharice now, not at her son. "You're taking my grandbabies away for Christmas, and not one person in this family gets a say in it." "It's after Christmas," Sharice said. 5 words. She kept her voice level. "Doesn't matter when it is. It matters that you decided it without asking anybody who actually built this family." Diane's voice climbed, not loud exactly, but harder, the way a hand tightens before it closes all the way. "Sending my grandbabies off to some beach, keeping them from the people who've been here their whole lives. That's exactly the kind of thing your mother would have done." No wonder she ended up with nobody around her at the end. Javon opened his mouth. "Mama," was as far as he got, 1 word, before Diane kept talking over it as if he had not spoken at all, and he did not try again. The table went completely still. Deshawn Jr., 11 going on 12 months into being 9 years old by then, looked up from his plate and did not look back down. Alia, 5, and mostly unaware of the words meant, only knew the room had changed shape the way children always know before they understand why. Sharice's mother had died 9 years earlier, alone in a hospital room in Petersburg, because the 2 people who should have been there had a flight delayed by a storm they could not control. Sharice had never told Diane the details. She had never told Diane anything about it at all. Diane did not need details to know exactly where to aim. Sharice did not answer her, not 1 word. She stood up, walked to Alia's chair, and lifted her out of it. She told Deshawn Jr. to get his shoes. She did all of it in under a minute, the way she moved a classroom of children through a fire drill. No wasted motion, no raised voice, every step already decided before her body started moving. "We're leaving," she said to Javon. 2 words wrapped inside a sentence he did not argue with, though he also did not stand up right away. Diane called after her from the table. "I'm only telling the truth. Somebody has to." Sharice did not turn around. In the car, Deshawn Jr. asked, very quietly, from the back seat, whether Grandma had said something bad about Grandma Renee. He remembered his other grandmother's name, the one in the photograph on Sharice's dresser, though he had never met her. "She did," Sharice said. 2 words, then 2 more. She was wrong. She did not explain further. Javon did not say anything the drive home which Sharice noticed and filed away the way she filed everything now. That night, after both children were finally asleep, Sharice sat alone on the back porch with her phone, the cold coming through her cardigan, her hand resting over the pin the way it did most nights now, without her deciding to put it there. She opened the folder. 12 recordings. She played the 12th one exactly once. 1 minute and 18 seconds, sustained yet every word of it clear enough to need no explaining to anyone who ever heard it. She did not cry listening to it. She sat very still, the porch light off, until the recording ended, and then she sat a while longer after that. She thought about all the dinners before the folder ever existed. 9 full years of them. Back when she still believed silence was the same thing as peace. It was not the same thing. It had never been the same thing. She understood that now the way she understood a pattern in her own classroom, all at once, after months of writing down data that had been trying to tell her something the whole time. She thought about Monique, too, 40 minutes away in her own house, who had grown up eating dinners exactly like this one, and had never once had a folder of her own to open. Some people never got the 12 years it took to build one. Some people just carried it, unrecorded, for the rest of their lives. She did not make a plan that night, not fully, not yet, but something in her had fishizating, the way a door finishes closing after it has already started to shut. The motion was done before she noticed the sound of it. Javon found her out there a little before midnight. He did not say much. He sat down next to her and asked, for the first time in 11 years, whether she was all right. No, Sharice said. One word. It was the most honest thing she had said to him in longer than either of them could have named. He did not ask what she was going to do about it. She would not have told him yet if he had. Sharice called Keisha on a Tuesday, 4 days after the porch, and said the plan out loud for the first time in her life to anyone, including herself. I'm going to play it, at Thanksgiving, in front of everybody. Keisha did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked the only question she asked. You sure? No, Sharice said, but I'm doing it anyway. Keisha did not try to talk her out of it. She had watched her sister absorb 12 recordings worth of Diane Monroe over the better part of a decade, and she understood, better than almost anyone, that this was not a decision made in anger. It was a decision made the way Sharice made every decision. Slowly, with a folder, after the anger had already burned down to something colder and more useful. 23 people were confirmed for Thanksgiving by the following week. Diane's 2 surviving siblings. 4 cousins Sharice mostly liked. Monique and her husband, an aunt from Petersburg who had not missed a Moraro Holly in 30 years, and the usual scattering of children who would eat exactly 2 bites of turkey and spend the rest of the afternoon underfoot. Sharice wrote every name down on an index card and started deciding where each one would sit. She put Diane at the head of the table she herself would be standing near. She put Monique close enough to see her mother-in-law's face without needing to turn. She put the 2 surviving siblings within reach of Diane, not across the room, because whatever happened, she wanted the people who had known Diane the longest close enough to hear every word without anyone having to repeat it for them. Diane called on Monday to ask what time to arrive and whether Sharice wanted her to bring the good tablecloth, the ivory one with the scalloped edge, since Sharice's table was smaller than the one Diane was used to setting. Sharice said the tablecloth would be lovely. She meant it. There was no reason not to mean it. Diane talked for 6 more minutes about the parking situation on Fenwick Lane and whether the Petersburg aunt should come early to help with the yams, and Sharice answered every question the way she always answered Diane's questions evenly, helpfully, giving no sign at all of what was sitting in a folder on the counter 3 feet from where she stood. She tested the speaker 3 separate times that week. Once with Keisha on speakerphone, confirming the volume carried clear from the dining room into the kitchen and back. She did not tell Keisha what she planned to say out loud before she played it. She had not decided the words yet. She only knew she wanted very few of them. On a Thursday night, alone in the kitchen after Javon had gone up to bed, she practiced anyway. Not the speech people gave in movies. Just a sentence, maybe 2, tested out loud against the empty room, until it stopped sounding rehearsed and started sounding like something she might actually say standing up. "I want to play you something," she said to the refrigerator twice, and both times it came out sounding exactly like what it was, a woman about to do something she had never done before. Javon noticed the change in her that week, the way a person notices weather shifting without being able to name the front moving through. She was quieter at dinner. She spent longer than usual on the seating chart for a holiday meal that in 11 years had never once required a chart. He asked her once if everything was all right. She told him she was just tired from hosting. It was not a lie, exactly. It also was not the whole truth. And some part of him seemed to know that and decide not to push, the way he had decided not to push most things for 11 years running. 2 nights before Thanksgiving, Sharice could not sleep. She got up at a little past 2 in the morning, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folder. Her thumb hovered over the 12th recording, not the play button this time, the delete button just beside it. She sat there for what felt like a long time, though she never checked the clock to see how long it actually was. The refrigerator hummed the way it always hummed at that hour. Somewhere down the hall, one of the kids turned over in bed, the floor creaking once and going quiet again. She thought about Deshaun Jr.'s shoulders coming up around his ears. She thought about the aunt from Petersburg who had always been kind to her, and what her face might do hearing this. She thought about Diane's white church hat, and the 22 years at the insurance office, and the fact that somewhere underneath all of it was a woman who had also once been somebody's daughter-in-law. She did not press delete. She also did not press play. She closed the folder, set the phone face down on the table, and sat in the dark kitchen a while longer, her hand resting on the pin she had forgotten she was still wearing over her nightgown. In the morning she told no one what had almost happened at 2 a.m., not Keisha, not Javon. It went into no folder at all. Some things she was learning did not need to be recorded to be real. The day before Thanksgiving, Keisha came by to help peel potatoes, and, without being asked, tucked the speaker's charging cable behind the sideboard where no curious hand would find it before it was needed. She did not ask again if Sharice was sure. She had asked once. Her sister had answered honestly. That was enough. Sharice slept better than she expected to the night before. She woke on Thanksgiving morning with the turkey already brining, the seating chart taped inside a kitchen cabinet where only she would think to look, and 12 recordings sitting in a folder that had been waiting patiently for almost exactly 11 years to finally be used for something. Deshaun Jr. asked at breakfast, mouthful of cereal, whether Grandma was still coming today. "She is," Sharice said, 2 words. She did not say anything else about it, and he did not ask anything else either. Already distracted by the parade on television, an 8-year-old's attention moved on from almost anything within 30 seconds. By noon, the house on Fenwick Lane would be full. 23 people filled the house on Fenwick Lane by 1 o'clock. The turkey came out golden. The cornbread dressing, Diane's recipe, made from the test-run batch's exact measurements, sat at the center of the table exactly where Sharice had planned to put it. Diane arrived in the ivory tablecloth she'd insisted on bringing and a dress the color of good news, and for the first hour, it was, by every visible measure, the best Thanksgiving the Monroe family had had in years. Diane complimented the flowers, centerpiece gifts, and the way Sharice had arranged the seating without once suspecting why any of it had been arranged the way it had. The kids' table sat in the corner near the window. Deshaun Jr., Aliyah, and 3 younger cousins, all of them more interested in the roles than the conversation. Keisha sat near the kitchen doorway, close enough to the sideboard that only she understood why she'd chosen that particular chair. The Petersburg aunt told the story she told every year about the year the gravy caught fire, and the table laughed the way it always laughed at that story, and for a little while it really did feel like nothing in that house was any different from the 22 Thanksgivings that had come before it. Sharice ate very little of her own plate. She refilled water glasses twice, cleared the gravy boat once, and kept one eye on the clock above the stove the whole time, the same steady attention she gave a classroom in the last 10 minutes before a fire drill nobody else knew was coming. Sharice waited until the plates were mostly cleared and the pie was still 20 minutes from the table. She stood up at the head of the room near the sideboard and tapped her water glass twice with a spoon. "I just want to say a few words," she said, "before dessert." Diane, 3 seats down, smiled the smile she wore for company. Well, look at her, hosting her very first Thanksgiving. She said it to the table, not to Sharice, the way she said most things about Sharice. Don't let it go to your head, dear. We all know whose recipes are really holding this family together. A few people laughed, the small, polite laugh a room gives when it isn't sure if something was a joke. Sharice did not laugh. She did not answer it either. Her hand found the pin at her collar, the same motion it had found 100 times before, except this time she let her fingers rest there instead of moving on. "I want to say thank you for coming," she said. "This is the first year we've hosted, and it means a lot to have everybody at this table. Javon and I have been looking forward to it for months." 23 faces looked back at her, warm, unsuspecting, mid-chew in some cases. "I also want to play you something," Sharice said. "It's short, 1 minute and 18 seconds. I'd ask everyone to just listen." Diane's smile did not move yet. Javon beside her went very still, the same stillness Sharice had learned to read in her own son, except on a grown man it took up more room, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her shoulder. Sharice reached beneath the sideboard, and the speaker Keisha had hidden the day before came alive with a small blue light. She pressed play. Diane's voice filled the room exactly as it had sounded on a Sunday night 9 days earlier, clear enough that nobody at that table would ever be able to say later that they weren't sure what they'd heard. "You're taking my grandbabies away for Christmas, and not one person in this family gets a say in it." A few chairs creaked. Nobody spoke. "Sending my grandbabies off to some beach, keeping them from the people who've been here their whole lives. That's exactly the kind of thing your mother would have done." No wonder she ended up with nobody around her at the end. Somewhere underneath Diane's voice, faint but unmistakable if a person knew to listen for it, was the sound of a 9-year-old asking, "Is Grandma mad at Mommy?" No one had answered him, not on the recording, and not that night at the table either. He was sitting 12 feet away right now, old enough this time to understand every word of what he was hearing played back. Nobody at that table moved for the length of it. Not the aunt from Petersburg, whose fork stopped an inch from her mouth and stayed there. Not the 2 surviving siblings, seated exactly where Sharice had placed them, close enough to hear every word without anyone needing to repeat it. Not Monique, who had gone the color of the tablecloth and did not blink until the recording ended. 1 minute and 18 seconds. Nobody breathed loud enough to be heard over it. It ended on its own, the way it had ended live. Mid-motion, unfinished, the microphone catching the sound of a car door instead of anything resembling a conclusion. Javon had not moved through any of it. His hands were flat on the table on either side of his empty plate, both of them pressed down hard enough that his knuckles had gone pale, as if the table itself needed holding in place. Sharice set the phone face down on the sideboard. She did not look at Diane. She looked at Javon. Diane was the first to speak, and what came out of her was not an apology. It was the same voice from the recording, only louder now, reaching for the room the way it always reached for the room. "You had no right to record me in my own home. It was never your house, Sharice said. 5 words. She did not raise her voice to say them the same way she never had. Silence again, different in shape than the first one. The aunt from Petersburg set her fork down entirely. One of Diane's sibling, a brother named Robert, who had not an unnecessary word at any Monroe holiday in the 11 years Sharice had known him, looked at his sister for a long moment, and then looked down at his plate, which said more than anything he could have put into words. Monique did not look at her mother-in-law at all. She looked at Sharice, and for the first time in 11 years, she did not look away first. Deshawn Jr., seated between his parents, looked up at his mother with an expression that was not confusion exactly, closer to recognition. The look of a child hearing an adult finally say a true thing out loud, in a room where true things about this particular subject had never once been said before. Aaliyah asked, into the quiet, whether she could still have pie. Nobody answered her right away. The pie sat exactly where Sharice had left it that morning, cooling on the counter behind them, 23 feet from a table that had just heard, in full and unedited, the thing it had spent 11 years pretending not to notice. Diane recovered her voice before anyone else recovered theirs. "I'm only saying what's true," she said. To the table now, the same line she had used at the steakhouse, the same line she had used at the christening, the same line she had used the Sunday before this one. Somebody has to. Nobody at the table agreed with her out loud this time. Nobody had ever agreed with her out loud, not really. But the silence followed the line now had a different weight to it than the silence that used to follow it. The kind of quiet that comes from a room finally admitting it had heard something all along. For a moment nobody at that table moved at all. The Petersburg aunt still had her fork suspended an inch above her plate. Aaliyah, too young to understand most of what had just happened, tugged twice at Javon's sleeve, asking again about pie, and got no answer either. Javon stood up. He had not said more than a handful of words since the recording started, and when he spoke now his voice did not shake the way Sharice half expected it to. It came out flat and slow and clearer than she had heard it in ever. "Not at my table," he said. "Not in front of my kids, not anymore." Diane turned to look at her son the way a person looks at a door they had never once considered might close. "Javon, it, Mama." 4 words this time, no softer than the first 3. He had never once in 11 years called his mother anything but Mama in that gentle, apologizing tone. This time the word came out the same as always. Everything underneath it had changed. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. 23 people were already not breathing loudly enough to miss a word of it. Diane did not answer him. For the first time at that table in 11 years, she did not have anything ready to say. The room did what rooms do after something like that. It moved. Chairs pushed back. Someone reached for the gravy boat that did not need clearing. The 2 surviving siblings stood together and carried plates toward the kitchen without being asked, the way people do when their hands need something to hold that is not the silence they just sat through. Robert paused beside Sharice on his way past and said nothing at all, only rested one hand briefly on her shoulder 2 seconds, maybe 3, before he kept walking. Sharice found the Petersburg aunt in the kitchen a few minutes later, scraping plates into the trash with more focus than plate scraping generally required. "That folder," the aunt said, not looking up. "How long?" 11 years, Sharice said. 12 recordings. The aunt set the plate down. She looked at Sharice for a long moment, the kind of look that did not need words attached to it, and then she picked the plate back up and kept scraping. "About time somebody did," she said, quiet enough that it was clearly meant for Sharice alone. She had known Diane for 31 years, since before Javon was born, back when Diane was the new bride at somebody else's table. "She learned it from somewhere too, I expect," the aunt said. "That never made it right, just made it old." Sharice dried her hands on her apron and did not say anything about the folder again. There was nothing left to add to it. The aunt went back to scraping plates, and for a while the 2 of them worked the kitchen in a sealed silence that was, for once, an easy one. Monique came into the kitchen a few minutes after that, dish towel already in hand, though nothing had asked to be dried yet. She stood next to Sharice at the sink for a while without saying anything, both of them washing dishes that were, by any reasonable measure, still perfectly clean. She used to do it to me too, Monique said finally, to the window over the sink, not to Sharice directly. Growing up. Different words, same everything else. Sharice did not say anything right away. She had suspected as much for 11 years and never once had it confirmed out loud. I never recorded any of it, Monique said. Never even occurred to me you could. I just left the room mostly. Went to my own house as soon as I could afford one. She dried a fork that did not need drying. I'm not saying that to make this about me. I'm saying it because I don't think anybody in that dining room right now understands what you just did. I do. You didn't have to say anything, Sharice said. I know, Monique said. I wanted to this time. Back in the dining room, at a table mostly emptied of everyone but her, Deanne sat alone with the ivory tablecloth she had insisted on bringing and the cornbread dressing that had, an hour earlier, been the best thing on the table. She reached for her water glass. She did not drink from it. She held it instead with both hands and did not set it back down for a long moment, long enough that anyone watching would have noticed the glass was not quite steady in her grip, though nobody was watching. Sharice was in the kitchen. Javon had followed the siblings out to the porch for air. Diane sat with the glass and the tablecloth and the dressing, and nobody saw whatever her face did next because there was, for the first time in 29 years of hosting Thanksgiving, no one left at that table to see it. Deshaun Jr. found his grandmother there a little later, on his way to the bathroom, and stopped in the doorway. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Diane looked at him for a moment before she answered. "I'm fine, baby," she said. It was the gentlest anyone had heard her sound all day. He nodded, the way children nod when an answer satisfies them without their fully understanding it, and went on to the bathroom. She did not follow him out. She sat at that table a while longer, by herself, while the rest of the house moved on around her. Dishes running in the kitchen, someone's laugh drifting in from the porch, off a football game turned back on low in the next room. Life continuing exactly the way it always had, just without her, for the length of one long Thanksgiving afternoon. Nobody asked her to leave. Nobody had to. She left before the pie was ever served, her ivory tablecloth still folded on the sideboard where she had set it down that morning, and nobody ran after her to bring it. Sharice noticed 3 days later that nobody had come back for it. It stayed folded on the sideboard. She left it there too. By the time the last of the family cars pulled out of the driveway that evening, the dining room had already been reset for pie. Nobody remembered ordering. Plates stacked, table wiped, the seating chart still taped inside its cabinet, no longer needed for anything. Đã dọn lỗi định dạng, dòng chống thừa, sửa hai lỗi story logic quan trọng. Mốc thời gian 2 năm giữa bản ghi âm đầu và cuối trong Personal Reflection sai sạp, theo dòng thời gian khi đã thiết lập. Round 1 tháng 3, round 3 tuần trước lễ tạ ơn cùng năm, khoảng cách thực tế là 8 tháng, không phải 2 năm. Và 3 chỗ ghi 12 năm đã sửa lại thành 11 năm cho khớp với con số neo xuyên suốt toàn bài. Section Power Line, Ket, Option A. 7 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday that was not a holiday at all, Sharice opened her phone to save a video and noticed the folder was still there. Thanksgiving. She had never renamed it, never deleted it, never really thought about it much anymore. Keisha asked that spring whether she was ever going to delete the whole thing. Sharice said no, not because she needed the recordings for anything anymore. She just did not see the point in pretending the 11 years before them had not happened, and a folder felt like as honest a place as any to let them keep existing, quietly, without being looked at. It did not hold what it used to hold. The 12 recordings still sat inside it, untouched, dated, exactly where they had always been. But everything added since that November afternoon was something else entirely. Deshaun Jr. missing a free throw and laughing about it anyway. Alia narrating an entire episode of a cartoon nobody had asked her to narrate. 40 seconds of Javon burning a pot of rice and blaming the stove. Ordinary footage. Nothing that needed keeping for any reason beyond wanting to keep it. Sharice watched the rice burning video 3 times in a row one evening, for no reason she could have explained, and laughed out loud alone in her kitchen both times. Diane still existed in that family's life, in a different shape than before. She came to Sunday dinner sometimes when she was invited, but was not every week and never assumed. She called ahead now. She had not hosted a holiday since that Thanksgiving, and nobody had asked her to, and she had not offered either. What passed between her and Sharice at the dinners she did attend was not warmth exactly, and it was not war anymore either. It was something quieter than both, 2 people who had said the true thing out loud once and did not need to say it again. At the March dinner, Diane complimented Deshawn Jr. on a school project without mentioning what anyone else in the family had or had not managed to teach him. It was a small thing. Sharice noticed it anyway, the way she noticed everything, and said nothing about noticing it, and let it stand since its own as exactly the size it was. Not forgiveness, not undoing, just one small thing done differently than before. Javon still called her Mama. He also, every so often, still had to say the sentence again, in smaller versions, the way a boundary has to be more than once before a person on the other side of it fully believes it is real. He said it anyway, every time. That was the part that mattered. In April, Diane suggested, almost carefully, that maybe the kids could come to her house one Saturday, just for the afternoon, with Javon dropping them off and picking them up himself. Javon said he'd check with Sharice first. He had never once, in 11 years, said that sentence about anything involving his mother. Sharice said yes. It was, this time, an actual question, asked by an actual person willing to hear the answer either way. Keisha came to the recital, too, and so did Monique, who had started coming to more things than she used to. Now that showing up did not automatically mean sitting through something. Deshawn Jr., 9.5 by then, sat between them with a book he had brought just in case the recital ran long. Silly Stillities did, the way Sharice suspected he always would. On the last Saturday in May, Aaliyah had her first dance recital, a small one at a community center off Hull Street, 6 years old now, and mostly interested in whether her tights matched her shoes. Sharice knelt in front of her backstage, in a hallway that smelled like hairspray and floor wax, and unclipped the pin from her own collar. She had worn it to every family gathering for going on 11 years. She pinned it now to the strap of Alia's recital costume instead, her fingers steady on the clasp, the way they had been steady on a lot of things lately. "This was your great-great-grandmother's," Sharice said. "It's old, it's a little chipped. Somebody once told me it looked cheap." Alia looked down at it, then back up at her mother. "You don't have to shrink for anybody, baby," Sharice said. "Not to make yourself smaller, not to make somebody else more comfortable. Not ever." Alia did not ask what that meant. She touched the pin once lightly with one finger, the hutches something they have decided, without being told, is worth being careful with. Then she asked if it was time to go on yet, and Sharice said almost, and that was the end of the conversation. Sharice straightened the strap once more, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and let her go find her spot in line with the 5 and 6-year-olds. All of them fidgeting in the same hallway, none of them carrying anything close to what that one small pin was carrying. The pin sat a little crooked on the strap of a purple leotard for the rest of that afternoon, through 2 costume changes and 1 drama edited, and nobody in that hallway, but Sharice, knew what it had cost anybody to get it there. I keep thinking about the 8 months between the first recording and the last one. Not the recordings themselves, the 8 months. All the ordinary Tuesdays and Sunday dinners in between, where nothing was being filmed, where Sharice was just living a life that looked, from the outside, completely fine. I think about how much of what actually holds a family together, or slowly comes apart, happens in exactly that kind of silence, the kind nobody would ever think to record, because it doesn't look like anything is happening at all. It is, it always is. If you've ever sat at a table and said nothing, and let everyone assume your silence meant you had nothing to say, I'd love to know what finally changed that for you, if it ever did. Type count below if any part of this one hit close to home. That's all I need to see. If this story reminded you of somebody, send it to them. Not to prove a point. Just because some people carry this kind of thing alone for a lot longer than they should have to. If stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. New stories every week. See you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction. The characters, names, events are imagined, but the experiences they reflect, the years it takes to find your voice, and the quiet way some people finally do, those are real. The behavior tracking method Sharice uses in this story is a real practice used in classrooms across the country for children whose bodies sometimes react during fast hard the jerks can keep up. Thank you for watching.